1917, the Bolsheviks took control of Russia, a country with over 160 million citizens, whose borders encompassed the world's largest single physical political landmass. The Bolshevik regime made no attempt to conceal their belief in the power of propaganda as they set to establish the ideology of the revolution. The People's Commissariat of Enlightenment was immediately created to oversee the responsibilities of both propaganda and education, which for the Bolsheviks were inseparable. The Russian population at this time was largely illiterate, and over 100 languages were spoken across the country. The Bolsheviks subjected the masses to a range of tools and methods designed to develop and maintain allegiance to the Communist Party ideology, while ensuring the exclusion of contradictory or alien ideological influences. The Bolsheviks developed mastery over visual literacy and produced tens of thousands of political posters and pamphlets. The visual imagery and short, powerful slogans were designed to spread party ideology across urban and rural populations. Lenin believed that cinema was one of the most important vehicles for promoting Communist Party ideology. Furthermore, Lenin's revisionism of basic Marxist principles led him to the belief that a true revolutionary consciousness could only be achieved through developing an accurate analysis of the true nature of capitalism, and then translating this analysis into simple ideas that could be shared with the working class through propaganda. The state's message was delivered to audiences across Russia in short, clear, and entertaining animations, as well as posters and pamphlets that presented ideological considerations in simple, visual contexts. The linguistic and cultural diversity of the Russian population was one of the most formidable problems that stood in the way of effective propaganda. The fact that over 100 languages were spoken in Russia, and the extent of illiteracy throughout urban and rural areas, made it essential that the Bolsheviks found a universal means of communicating with the illiterate masses. Cinema seemed to offer a perfect solution, and appeared to be an ideal medium for constructing propaganda, as it was modern, practical, and able to break through language barriers. Early Bolshevik ideology represented a blending of science, culture, and politics, and this would be evidenced within the propaganda designed and disseminated throughout Russia. Cinema would be the means to create propaganda that was accessible across the Russian population, designed to be attractive and entertaining while providing powerful connections to memory. The need to establish power over the population and the changing political imperatives of the first few years of Bolshevik rule reaffirmed the importance of placing a high priority on the party focus on propaganda. Through a war of words and images against their capitalist enemies, the goal was to capture the hearts and minds of the Russian population. Bolshevik propaganda was based around an elaborate ideology consisting of an official body of doctrine that covered all vital aspects of existence, to which everyone within society was supposed to adhere to, at least passively. Ideological issues were decisively important in the leadership thinking, mass politics, and constitutions and laws of Russia. The attempt to develop a mass political consciousness of the Russian population had been the object of a lengthy and intensive process of political education and propaganda whose origins even preceded the foundation of the Bolshevik regime in 1917. Primarily oral modes of communication allowed for inconvenient parts of the past to be forgotten due to the needs and requirements of the continuing present. Successful revolutions are those which end up by erasing all traces of themselves. In doing so, they make the situation they struggled to bring about seem entirely natural. Successful states are those that have managed to wipe the bloody history from the minds of their citizens. If not, they are likely to be plagued with political conflict. With the challenge of spreading ideology amongst a largely illiterate, culturally diverse population, the Bolsheviks incorporated language structures, often found within oral cultures, to promote understanding and to implement in memory. According to Walter Ong, in his work Orality and Literacy, the elements of orally based thought and expression tend to be not so much simple integers as clusters of integers, such as parallel terms or phrases or clauses, epithets. Therefore, oral expression carries a load of epithets and other formulary baggage. For example, the brave soldier rather than just the soldier, or the sturdy oak rather than just the oak. These official epithets for various important events in Soviet history were prevalent within communist propaganda throughout the 20th century and could be regarded as attempts to stabilize ideological thought. Oral cultures are reassured that these traditions must be kept intact, and therefore, the citizens are not meant to question or cast doubt on the attribution. Traditional expressions or epithets in oral cultures must not be dismantled, as once a formulary expression has been established in the minds of the population, it had best be preserved and kept intact. The expression of praise is also prevalent within oral cultures as part of the tradition of rhetoric. These rhetorical patterns were part of the language of indoctrination being implemented within schools and as part of the ideological, political messages within Bolshevik posters and films. Again, Walter Ong states that although the praise in the oral rhetoric traditions may be viewed by high literacy cultures as being insincere or comically pretentious, these expressions of praise are encompassed within the highly polarized oral world of good and evil, virtue and vice, and villains and heroes, and new situations. Communist propaganda was often drafted in the urban centers amongst party members without local consultation, and therefore the challenge was to create slogans and messages that would be appealing to the rural local people. With such a range of cultures and languages to be found across Russia, propaganda needed to be designed to include the central ideology in conjunction with local culture, as these had often very distinct characteristics. Taken together with other aspects of the ideological work of the party, such as education, the arts, literature, and mass media, a system of political instruction and persuasion has come into being, which is probably unprecedented in its scope and intensity. Furthermore, the success of Soviet citizenship training depended on the ways in which the main tenets of the ideology were internalized by the population. The Bolsheviks understood that seizing political power was a short-term affair, as transforming the customs, institutions, and habits of feeling of an entire society takes a great deal longer. Industry can be socialized through government decree, but legislation alone cannot produce men and women who feel and behave differently from their grandparents. This would mean that political propaganda would necessarily involve a lengthy process of education and cultural change. Discovering revolutionary and ideological commitment and assessing the effectiveness of the ideologically driven education system was often best represented within higher educational settings. During the early 1920s, Moscow State University replaced termly examinations with tests in which academic achievement was judged alongside party-mindedness and political or moral deviations. Academic seminars followed the lead of aggressive questioning and methods of confrontational dialogue that had been developed within the Red Army. These often took the form of theatrical propaganda for audiences, and would later form the basis for the mass spectacle of the Stalinist show trials. For the Bolsheviks, education always served a political focus, and Lenin had attached a great importance on the need to achieve universal literacy. As long as there is such a thing in the country as illiteracy, it is rather hard to talk about political education. The illiterate person stands outside of politics. First, it is necessary to teach him the alphabet. Without it, there are only rumors, fairy tales, prejudices, but not politics. As a precondition for politics, education was a key weapon in the war for transforming the beliefs and ideology of the citizens of the new society. Education was another form of propaganda, and in effecting radical change in attitudes and ideology, it would help to create the new men, women, and children who would be able to build socialism according to the goals of the Communist Party, as disseminated by the People's Commissariat of Enlightenment. The central goal of Bolshevik education was to transform schools to become an organ for the complete abolition of the division of society into classes, and therefore an organ for the communist regeneration of society. Schools would reflect non-segregation and emphasize active learning and commitment to the importance of work in accordance with Bolshevik ideological goals. However, by the late 1920s, with increased bureaucratization and centralization within Russia under Stalin's regime, education was once again transformed and suffered under an imposed curriculum, the reintroduction of privilege, and the elimination of progressive ideas, creativity, and freedoms. As Stalin's policies towards political, economic, and social development changed after the death of Lenin, the nature and goals of Stalin's propaganda campaigns will be altered towards totalitarian ideals.